Like all states, Oregon is faced with a very serious fiscal condition. In our case, a projected budget deficit of $3.5 billion, or about 20% of the general fund. But if you look beyond this number, you will see that this fiscal crisis is being driven by some very disturbing trends. The percentage of state resources that we are spending on prisons and on the human consequences of addiction and neglect and abuse is actually increasing, while the amount of money we're investing in children and creating a better economy is going down, and that trend is accelerating. And to understand the problem that creates, you need to understand the two ways in which state agencies spend money. The first way is by investing in people, in children, in families, in education, and in workforce development. Those are investments that make people's lives better, that give people a pathway to a family wage job, that give them a pathway to economic security, and lifts the whole state up. People who have an education are much more likely to be successful in the workplace, they're much more likely to be healthy, and they're much less likely to need social support to be involved in the criminal justice system. Now, the other way we spend money is by taking care of problems after they've been created, in foster care, in public assistance, and in the criminal justice system. So locking people up in our prisons and in our jails, and much of what we spend in our healthcare system and in our social support systems are expenditures rather than investments. They're important in the sense that they deal with immediate problems, but they're problems that could have been prevented if we'd done a better job and been more effective investing in people on the front end. Today, Oregon is spending increasingly more and more money dealing with problems and less money investing in people. We've got our priority backwards. We've got to turn this around, and that is the central challenge, I think, that lies before us in the budget of 2011-2013. Now, this isn't the first time that Oregon's pattern of boom-bust has led us to this point. And historically, state government's response to this is to cut from this structure during lean times and then add back those cuts during good times, but essentially leaving the basic structures through which we deliver programs essentially intact. And it's that cycle that we've repeated over and over and over again that's brought us to this point. The time has come to break definitively from the past. That's why I ran for governor, and that's how I intend to lead through the upcoming legislative session. Think of state government as a house that was built many, many years ago. And think of Oregonians as the family that's been living in this house for generations. Now, when the house was built, it was probably designed to meet the needs of that family. But over time, the family has changed, its needs have changed, and the way it lives has changed. The rooms are the wrong size, and they're too big, and there are too many of them. The windows are drafty, there's no insulation, and the cost of maintaining this house is more than the family can afford. The foundation's cracked, the roof needs to be entirely replaced. And at some point, simply patching things up doesn't work anymore. You have to build a new house that's designed to meet the current needs of the family and the way it lives. And that's exactly the position that Oregon finds itself in today. This is the legislative session where we're going to stop kicking the can down the road and start reshaping Oregon state government. Instead of creating a budget in the next 6 months that does less of the same with the hope that sometime in the future we can do more of the same, I intend to present a budget and some structural reforms that will actually begin to do things differently. By December 21st, I will be announcing several of those major structural changes. A strategy to transform our system of public education, a strategy for comprehensive reform of our healthcare system, and the development of a 10-year energy plan. Today, we're going to be focusing specifically on the budget with a roadmap through this fiscal crisis that involves 7 key steps. First is managing within the available resources that we have in those areas of the general fund that consume about 93% of the budget, education, human services, and public safety, with a particular emphasis on early childhood investment. Second, addressing the growth in personnel costs. Third, developing a 10-year budget frame to allow us to keep this strategy moving over the next decade. Fourth, an effort to increase revenue collections under the existing tax code through the Department of Revenue. Fifth, reviewing and reprioritizing Oregon's tax expenditures in view of our current revenue situation. Sixth, reviewing state audits to make sure that agencies are actually performing and complying with the recommendations of the Secretary of State. And finally, increasing the effectiveness and efficiency and transparency of state government by moving to an outcomes-based management system. Now, this strategy and this budget is going to start by asking a fundamentally different question than we've asked in the past. The question we're asking, and that I'm going to be asking of the transition teams that I'll be appointing this morning, is not what are we going to cut, but rather how are we going to take the revenue that we know we have and invest it differently going forward to create a foundation, a solid foundation on which we can build a better future. Now, the transition teams that I'm going to be appointing this morning are not political teams. They have been given a very specific task. I've asked them to make recommendations that can be incorporated in my budget. So they have a short time frame, about 6 weeks, and will be producing very specific deliverables. I'll be announcing only the co-leaders of these teams this morning, but the membership will be very diverse, and it will involve frontline workers, labor, and representatives of both chambers and both parties. So if the question that we're asking to tee up our budget work is how do we take the revenue we know we have and invest it differently going forward to create a solid foundation for building Oregon's future, then nowhere is the answer to that question more important than in early childhood. If we hope to reverse our pattern of investments in our general fund, if we hope to shift from dealing with problems on the back end to preventing them on the front end, we have to recognize that the foundation for academic and social and economic success lies in the early childhood years, before kindergarten, before Head Start, indeed almost at birth. Now that is exactly why I've chosen the Gladstone Center for Children and Families to announce the strategy to move our state forward. This center represents exactly the kind of new thinking and system redesign that is going to be required of us in the months and years ahead. It offers a one-stop facility for prenatal education, pre-K and kindergarten in a district where about half of the preschoolers or grade schoolers are on a reduced or free lunch program. It also houses space for the county human services and mental health programs, and soon we'll have a public health clinic with a pediatric focus. This kind of integrated approach to investing in early childhood in families reflects what we have to be doing throughout the state of Oregon if we want to build a better and more secure future. Because despite the abundant evidence of the long-term social and individual benefits of investing in early childhood, our investments often come far too late, if at all. We fail, in many cases, to identify early the children who are at risk and provide them with the support and resources necessary to get them set up on a healthy life trajectory. And while there is a wide range of public and private and not-for-profit organizations and services and programs all focused on early childhood and families, they do not work in concert, they are less than the sum of their parts, and they are disconnected from the K-12 system. So we need to capitalize on the opportunity embedded in this budget crisis to bring about a fundamental reform in how we organize and coordinate and fund investments in early childhood and families. Towards that end, I'm appointing a transition team that is designed and charged with recommending strategies for a sustained investment in early childhood as a foundational element in achieving our educational and economic objectives. This team will be co-chaired by Lynn Saxton, who's the CEO of Christie Care, and Pam Curtis, who's the Deputy Director of the Center for Evidence-Based Policy at the Oregon Health Sciences University, and Bob Stewart, who is here, will also be a member of this work group. And the specific charge for this task force is included in the materials that we handed out. Now, in addition to early childhood, we also have to manage within available resources in those other areas that constitute the majority of the general fund, starting with education. If, in fact, early childhood investment is foundational to achieving our long-term educational and economic objectives, then clearly our system of public education is equally important. The state school fund, which constitutes about 40% of the general fund, pays for 70% of our primary and secondary system. However, the decisions about how these state resources are spent, and to some extent how fast the cost of the K-through system grows, is determined at the local level by 197 independently elected school boards who are bargaining with local collective bargaining units. Now, post-secondary education, which must be a continuation of our high school diploma to secure our economic future, and 8% of our general fund, is equally important. Enrollment in our community colleges and our universities is going up. there is at least the perception in the post-secondary community that their needs are put second to those of K through 12. Community college budgets and collective bargaining decisions are spread across 17 institutions, and the Oregon University system is heavily micromanaged by the Oregon State Legislature. So within this governance structure, and within this current economic environment, I'm appointing two transition teams, one to deal with primary and secondary education, and one to deal with post-secondary education, and they're being given the following general charge: to determine how best to allocate the resources we have, assuming flat funding of general fund and lottery fund over the next 2 years, and assuming no additional federal stimulus resources are going to be available. How do we preserve the delivery services? How do we set priorities in allocating the resources we have? How can the delivery model be changed to improve efficiency and effectiveness in producing those outcomes? And how can we allocate the resources in this biennium to create a platform for reinvesting in a more effective and efficient system in the future when more resources become available? Now, each of these transition teams also has a very specific charge, which again is included in the materials that I handed out. The primary and secondary education transition team will be chaired by Nancy Golden, who is the superintendent of schools in the Springfield School District, and Ron Saxton, who is the executive vice president at Jeld-Wen. The post-secondary transition team will be co-chaired by Duncan Wise, who is the president of the Oregon Business Council, and by Mary Spildy, who is the president of Lane Community College in Eugene.